Hello friends, I am Arpit and I am here with today's analysis. Today is 20th of November and we are going to deal with two very important topics which are in news. The first is National Epilepsy Day. This National Epilepsy Day is observed on 17th of November every year. Epilepsy is kind of a neurological disorder which impacts the brains. There are, I would say, fits or seizures which happen, and this is quite common either among the children or in the old age people. It is not curable, but yes, this symptoms and all can be treated. Things can be avoided, like you cannot expose yourself to flickering of light, get maximum sleep as you can. Things like these can be, I would say, the desired treatment for it, but yes, it is not 100% curable. India has around 10% of the patients of epilepsy in the world, and yes, it impacts our country that much. Next is Rio de Janeiro G20 Summit 2024. Well, the last year's summit was in India, this year in Brazil, and this is the first time a G20 summit is being hosted by Brazil. Brazil has passed on the baton of presidency to South Africa, and it was a mixed bag. The leaders did not succeed in picking up goals for climate change, neither for the conflicts which are happening in Russia, Ukraine, or in West Asia. But yes, a global hunger alliance has been formed which aims to reduce hunger by 2030. And India obviously is part of it. That is the main outcome of this particular summit. So we'll see the details. We'll deal with the MCQs based on these two topics and discuss the answers to the MCQs of yesterday. So the National Epilepsy Day, as I said, it is observed on 17th of November every year. This National Epilepsy Day is dedicated to raising awareness about epilepsy, its symptoms, and the challenges faced by those affected by this disease. It also, emphasizes the importance of early diagnosis and treatment which is required for epilepsy. It is a brain disease where nerve cells don't signal properly, which causes seizures among these people. Seizures are uncontrolled bursts of electrical activities that change sensations, behaviors, awareness, and muscle movements. Epilepsy can't be cured. Many treatment options are available for it. Means those symptoms and all can be pacified. But yes, cure means those symptoms stop surfacing or those seizures stop happening completely. That is not possible as of now. So, this National Epilepsy Day aims to generate awareness, also highlights the importance of early detection or early, I would say, diagnosis of this particular disease, which is a neurological disorder which impacts the brain. History of National Epilepsy Day. Basically, it was established to highlight difficulties faced by the people suffering from epilepsy. This day gained significance in India thanks to the efforts of health organizations such as Epilepsy Foundation and other advocacy groups. Initiation, the day was initiated by Epilepsy Foundation of India, which was founded by Dr. Nirmal Surya in Mumbai in 2009. Global impact, according to the World Health Organization, nearly 50 million people around the world suffer from epilepsy, with India contributing to 10 to 20% of the global total. So, it is substantial in India. Now, the common signs and symptoms of epilepsy. Epilepsy is basically marked by loss of awareness. Like, in Hindi, we call it mirgi. And when seizures happen, we call it mirgi ke daure pad rahe. So, you know, generally those people who are prone to these kind of seizures, the epilepsy seizures, their awareness is not up to the mark. They kind of are lost. They kind of are not mentally present most of the times. So this lack of awareness is there, leading to a blank stare, confusion, or unresponsiveness. Uncontrollable movements. The person may experience jerking or muscle contractions that cannot be controlled. Cognitive disruptions, the ability to think gets disrupted. Sensory disturbances, some may experience altered sensory perceptions such as dizziness, nausea, or feeling a sense of fear. Then, psychic symptoms. In some cases, individuals might feel intense emotions such as overwhelming fear or experience hallucinations. Types of epileptic seizures. Epileptic seizures can be categorized into two primary types. One is focal onset seizures and second is generalized onset seizures. The focal onset seizures start in one specific area of the brain. There are two types. Focal onset aware seizures, the person remains conscious but may experience involuntary movements or sensations. Focal onset impaired awareness seizures, the person may lose consciousness or awareness during the seizure. So these are the two types of focal onset seizures. The second type of seizures which happen is generalized onset seizures. Absence seizures, a brief period of staring or unresponsiveness is there. Atonic seizures, a sudden loss of muscle strength leading to a person collapsing or falling. Tonic seizures, muscle stiffening that can cause the person to fall or be unable to move. Clonic seizures, repetitive jerking movements. Tonic clonic seizures, a combination of stiffening and jerking movements, often called a grand mal seizure. Myoclonic seizures, sudden brief jerks or twitches, often affecting the arms or legs. So, this is basically the types of generalized onset seizures. But yes, you know, generally we see that, physical, I would say, impact is also there, psychological impact is also there of these kind of seizures. Prevention tips for epilepsy: take medicines on time. There are medicines, but yes, it is not curable. It will try to suppress the symptoms or it will try to reduce the frequency of these seizures. So, medication is crucial in managing epilepsy. So, you can manage epilepsy, you cannot cure epilepsy. People with epilepsy should take their prescribed medication on time and follow their doctor's advice. Regular visits to neurologists are important to help control seizures. Get enough sleep. Sleep deprivation can trigger seizures. It is important to maintain a regular sleep schedule and get sufficient rest to minimize the risk of seizures. Avoid caffeine. Caffeine can act as trigger for some people with epilepsy, so that should be avoided, like coffee, energy drinks, soda containing caffeine, and these should be limited or avoided. Stay hydrated. Dehydration can lead to various health issues, including seizures. It is important for individuals with epilepsy to drink plenty of water throughout the day. Avoid flickering lights. Certain types of flashing or flickering lights can trigger seizures, especially in children. Individuals with epilepsy should avoid exposure to flashing lights from television screens, computer monitors, and mobile phones. So, this is what that can be done to manage epilepsy. Now, the next piece of news is Rio de Janeiro G20 Summit 2024. So Rio de Janeiro is in Brazil. So this year's summit was in Brazil, and this was the very first time that Brazil was hosting the G20 summit. And this was the first time that African Union was participating in this G20 summit as a full-time member, because its inclusion was announced last year by India in New Delhi. And this year's summit, basically Brazil had these agenda priorities, the three areas. First was social inclusion and the fight against hunger. Second is energy transition from non-renewable to renewable, or non-fossil based to non-fossil based fuels, and sustainable development in its social, economic, and environmental aspects. Then third is reform the global governance institutions. That was there last year also. Now about this G20 as an organization, we should know basic facts. See, these are the world's 20 biggest economies. African Union, 21 are there. 19 countries, one EU and one AU. EU is European Union, AU is African Union. Actually, these 21 members are there of this G20 now. With African Union participating as a full-time member, so we can say that there are 21 members. Although the name is G20, it has not been changed to G21. Technically speaking, it should have been changed. This grouping was formed in the year 1999 after, the Cold War ended, globalization was happening. India itself globalized in 1991. The reason for this particular grouping to be formed, the 20 biggest economies of the world coming together, was that any negative impacts anywhere were having impacts everywhere, because we were globalized now, the economies were connected. So the main reason for this G20 grouping to be formed was the economic crisis in the Southeast Asian region. Countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, they were impacted. And those negative, I would say, developments over there in these countries had impacts all across the world, because the world was connected. The world was getting connected. Now the world is, I would say, uh, much more connected. And you know, uh, the finance ministers and the central bank governors, they started meeting so that they could align their fiscal and monetary policies. Central bank governors, like for example, RBI governor in India, monetary policy, finance ministers, fiscal policies. So these 20 countries, could align their fiscal and monetary policies. For that purpose, this organization was formed. Okay. The story was going ahead, and finally in 2008 there was a financial crisis in America, the world's largest economy, and the entire world was impacted, including India. Although the impact on India was not that great as it was on other countries. Up these G20 leaders thought ki bhai, what is the point of coordination when we are still getting impacted? So we need to do something bigger. We cannot dissolve this institution. We need to upgrade this institution. And since 2008, the heads of the governments or the heads of the states of these 20 countries, they also started meeting. So since 2008-9, G20 has two parallel tracks. One is called as the finance track, which was already existing. Finance minister, central bank governors, they are meeting. The second track is the Sherpa track, where the heads of the states and heads of the governments are meeting. What is Sherpa? Sherpa is a personal representative of the heads of the states or heads of the government. Sherpa, every head of the state or head of the government will have a Sherpa. That Sherpa will do multiple meetings, and there will be a summit in once in a year, like it was here in Rio de Janeiro right now, where the heads of the states and head of the government will be coming, and that Sherpa will be giving the crux of all the meetings conducted by him and other Sherpas over the year to the heads of the state or heads of the government respectively, and they will be discussing the outcomes of those meetings in the summit. So in short, Sherpa prepares the summit. G20 countries are very important. 80% of the global economy, global GDP is here in these 20 countries. 79% of the global emissions, almost 80% only, are done from these particular countries. Around 66% of the world's population, two-thirds of the world population is here in these 20 countries, now 21. So they are basically the drivers, I would say. And you know, the members of this G20 countries, Canada, USA, Mexico, these three in North America. So we can learn continent by continent. That is the, I would say, trick over here. In South America, we have Brazil and Argentina. In Africa, we have South Africa and African Union, we can say. Then in Europe, we have UK, France, Germany, Italy, and EU. In Asia, we have Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, India, Japan, South Korea, Indonesia, and in Australia, we have Australia. So these are the 21 countries which are, or 19 countries and two economic blocks, one European Union and one African Union part of it. So it is always better and advisable to go continent by continent. You will find it easy, and questions based on membership you can tackle. Now, five key takeaways from this year's G20 summit. First, no climate breakthrough was achieved. There were high expectations that G20 leaders would help to restart the stalled UN climate talks happening in Azerbaijan. However, the final declaration was underwhelming. In the declaration, G20 acknowledged the need for climate finance to scale up from billions to trillions of dollars, but it failed to specify who would provide the funds. Technically speaking, the developed countries have to provide these funds. Additionally, the G20 did not reiterate the commitment made at COP28 climate talks in Dubai last year for just orderly and equitable transition away from fossil fuels. So last year we decided that transition away from fossil fuels. Earlier, the resolution was kept phasing out of fossil fuels, means we had to completely stop using fossil fuels, but countries like India, China objected to it. Now, the Trump administration is also objecting to it. It is also not in this favor. And this is basically the issue. Mick Sheldrick, co-founder of the Global Citizen Campaign, criticized the lack of progress, stating they haven't stepped up to the challenge. And these 21 countries almost are emitting 80% of the global emissions. Talking about the Ukraine war, war in Ukraine was one of the central points of the summit, and it has been one of the central points of the summit since the 2022 summit, which was in Indonesia, 2023 in India, now in Brazil. Just before the summit, United States had granted Ukraine approval to use long-range American missiles to strike Russian territory. In response, Russia said that it would take actions if its territory was hit. Chinese President Xi Jinping, along with Brazil, has been pushing for peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. He called on the G20 to support efforts to cool the war. G20 leaders in their final statement welcomed constructive initiatives aimed at securing comprehensive, just, and durable peace in Ukraine. While they condemned the threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition, they made no direct mention of Russian aggression in their statement. And in 2022 summit, uh, Russia was condemned heavily. In India, Russia was not condemned. In fact, no one was condemned. In Brazil also, we are not condemning anyone as such. We are not naming any country in the condemnation. Third is Lebanon Gaza ceasefire calls. Leaders of G20 representing diverse political views made calls for comprehensive ceasefires in both Gaza and Lebanon. In Gaza, the G20 leaders expressed support for a US proposed UN resolution calling for a permanent ceasefire in exchange for release of all hostages. In Lebanon, the G20 urged for a ceasefire that would allow civilians to return safely to their homes along the Blue Line, the demarcation between Lebanese and Israeli forces. These calls for ceasefire reflected the G20's desire for peace in Middle East or West Asia, but yes, will it happen? Will it not happen? No concrete outcome was there. Fourth, some progress was made over here. Tax the super rich. Super rich. A significant outcome of the summit was the endorsement of taxing ultra wealthy individuals. Now we need to understand over here that G20 is not imposing sanctions as such, but G20 is telling the individual countries that you know, pass certain laws in your respective countries through which you will be taxing extra the super rich. The G20 leaders agreed to work together to ensure that ultra high net worth individuals are effectively taxed across nations. This was considered a victory for Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who had prioritized this issue. But the declaration stressed that such international cooperation on tax policies should be done with full respect to tax sovereignty. Means it is up to the individual countries to decide. Okay, we are talking about this in an international forum, and whatever we are talking over here, whatever discussions are happening in G20, they are not legally binding. That is one thing which you need to understand. They are not legally binding, they are just there to shape perceptions. And the fifth and the last key takeaway was alliance against hunger. This was actually the biggest takeaway. One of the main issues which was championed by President Lula was the creation of a global alliance against hunger. At the summit, 82 countries signed on to the initiative, making it a major success for Brazil's presidency. Alliance seeks to unite international efforts in the fight against hunger and secure financing for anti-hunger programs. The alliance aims to reduce hunger for 500 million people by the end of this decade, that is 2030. Remember, SDG with respect to hunger, SDG 2 is eliminating hunger by 2030. But this is talking about reducing hunger among 500 million population. So Lula, the president of Brazil, who grew up in poverty, referred to hunger as the scourge that shames humanity and expressed the urgency of addressing this issue globally. And yes, it should be addressed globally, and the high income countries should be coming to the rescue over here, because it is being assumed in the global hunger index also that there is zero hunger in those countries. But in those countries where hunger persists and is basically there existing for a very long time, those countries should be helped. That is the main thing. Now, the MCQs. Consider the following statements and mark the correct one. Epilepsy is a brain disorder. Epilepsy is not curable. You have to find the correct option. Only one, only two, both one and two, neither one nor two. Which of these are symptoms of epilepsy? Loss of appetite, loss of awareness, uncontrollable movements. Carefully answer this particular question. Consider the following statements with respect to G20 summit in Brazil 2024 and mark how many of them are correct. The keyword is how many. The 2024 summit was the first ever summit in Brazil. African Union joined as a full-time member for the first time. Social inclusion and fighting against hunger was one of the priority areas. Which of how many of these statements are correct? Only one statement is correct, only two statements are correct, all the statements are correct, or none of the statements are correct. Which of the following countries is not part of G20? Italy, South Africa, Indonesia, UAE. Which of the following is the objective of Global Hunger Alliance formed during Brazil's G20 presidency? Eliminate hunger by 2050, eliminate hunger by 2030, to reduce hunger for half a billion people by 2030, or none of the above. Now, answers to the MCQs of yesterday. Consider the following statements with respect to India and Nigeria and mark the correct one. India and Nigeria established strategic partnership in 2024. No, they established strategic partnership 17 years ago when Dr. Manmohan Singh visited Nigeria. The last prime minister before Narendra Modi to visit Nigeria was Dr. Manmohan Singh in 2007. After 17 years, any Indian prime minister has visited Nigeria, and at that time, during that visit, India-Nigeria strategic partnership was established. In 2024, we were talking about deepening the already existing strategic partnership. So this statement is wrong. Nigeria is Africa's largest economy. Yes, plus the largest energy producer. So this statement is correct. Only two is going to be the correct answer over here. Which of these statements about Grand Commander of Order of the Niger are true? It is the highest national honor of Nigeria. Yes, it is. Queen Elizabeth was the first foreign national to receive this award. Yes, 1969 was the year when she received it. And the second foreign national to receive this award is our Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. So, this statement is also correct. So, both 1 and 2 are correct. Recently, the debt break rule of Germany was in news. What does it mean? It means the government cannot take loan during emergency years. No. It means the government cannot take loans beyond 0.35% of the GDP. Yes. Not 35%. None of the above we need. 0.35% of the GDP. And this is done to make the finances of the government more sustainable. And uh, during emergency years like COVID or Russia-Ukraine war, this rule was, I would say, broken, and a resolution was passed by the parliament of Germany to, take more funding or take more loans. But unfortunately, those loans were being spent in other areas now, like the unspent 60 billion euros were being invested in renewable energy, or some other areas and all, which the courts in Germany have said that this is unconstitutional, and that became one of the reasons of conflict between the ruling coalition partners, which has led to political instability in Germany now. Fourth, consider the following statements with respect to Bodoland Mahotsav and mark the correct one. In 2024, the first ever Bodoland Mahotsav was celebrated. That is true. It aims to promote peace and harmony on one side and cultural and linguistic integration on the other side of the Bodo people. This is also true. Both 1 and 2 are correct over here in this regard. Okay. And this is it from my end in today's session. I will be meeting you tomorrow now with more such informative news pieces. Till then, you guys very well know what to do. Keep studying, keep reading, keep writing, and most importantly, keep revising. Namaste. Jai Hind.